The shy rancher's life changes forever when a wounded Apache woman rides into his land. Thomas Kane had always been a quiet man, someone who found comfort in the routine of ranch life. His days were spent tending to cattle, mending fences, and fixing up the old farmhouse that had been in his family for generations. There was a peace to it, though it was a peaceful loneliness. The ranch stretched far and wide, bordered by dusty hills and rocky outcrops. Most days, the only company he had was the sound of the wind sweeping across the land or the occasional rustling of cattle. Thomas wasn't exactly shy, but he wasn't the type to seek out company. He didn't mind the solitude. It allowed him to focus on the work that needed doing in the quiet of the land. He had never thought much about marriage or love. What did he need it for, anyway? The ranch was all he had. But that was before the day she came. It was late afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows over the land. Thomas had just finished mending a fence when he noticed a figure in the distance. At first he thought it was a mirage. The heat and dust often played tricks on his eyes. But as the figure grew closer, he saw that it was a rider, struggling to stay upright on a horse. The woman's silhouette was barely visible against the setting sun, but Thomas could tell she was in trouble. The horse wobbled, and the rider's body swayed dangerously. She wasn't going to last much longer. Without thinking, Thomas dropped his tools and hurried toward the ranch gate. His heart beat faster, a sense of urgency creeping up his spine. When he reached the gate, he saw her more clearly. A woman, her face bloodied, her clothes torn, and her eyes filled with a fierce but weary determination. She looked like she'd been through hell and back. The horse stumbled, and the woman slid off its back, collapsing to the ground with a soft groan. "Hey, are you all right?" Thomas called out, kneeling beside her. She didn't respond at first, only stared up at him with sharp eyes, distrust clear in her gaze. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, her body shook with exhaustion, and her eyelids fluttered, fighting sleep. Thomas's heart thudded in his chest. She was in bad shape. The blood soaking her clothes told him that much. He had to help her, no question about it. He reached out, gently supporting her as he pulled her up. "You're safe now. Come on, let me get you inside." At first she resisted, her hands pushing weakly against him. But when she saw the kindness in his eyes, she relented. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse and tired. Thomas led her inside, supporting her weight as best as he could. She was taller than him, and he could feel the tension in her muscles as if she was ready to fight at any moment. But he didn't let go. He knew she needed help, whether she liked it or not. Once inside, he settled her onto the couch in the living room, careful not to jostle her injured body too much. She winced as he moved her, but she didn't protest. Thomas hurried to fetch some water and bandages, hoping he could tend to her wounds before they got worse. When he returned, she was staring out the window, her back stiff, her expression unreadable. "Here," Thomas said gently, holding out a cup of water. "You need to drink something." She took it, her hands shaking slightly as she sipped. Her eyes never left the window, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. After a few long minutes, she set the cup down, her eyes finally meeting his. "I'm Ayana," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas," he replied. "You're safe now, Ayana. You don't need to worry." She didn't say anything, her gaze turning cold and distant. It was clear she didn't trust him. Thomas didn't blame her. She was an Apache woman, and he was a rancher. Two worlds that often didn't mix. He had heard enough stories about raids and battles, of the deep divides between settlers and the native tribes. He knew she was probably running from something or someone, but right now, she needed help, and he wasn't going to turn her away. "You've been through a lot," he said quietly. "Let me take a look at your injuries. You'll be fine, but you need rest." She didn't fight him this time as he carefully removed her torn shirt to examine the cuts and bruises on her skin. There were several deep gashes, and one of them was still bleeding. Thomas cleaned the wounds as best as he could, trying to make her as comfortable as possible. She winced at the sting of the antiseptic, but she didn't speak, didn't make a sound. Thomas finished bandaging her up and then sat back, looking at her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "What happened to you?" he asked. Ayana's eyes flickered toward him, and for a moment he saw a flash of something. Fear, anger, or perhaps a mixture of both, but she quickly masked it, turning her gaze toward the window again. "I was running," she said after a long silence. "My people, they were attacked." Thomas nodded, understanding more than she knew. He had heard the stories, of course. Apache raids, settlers fighting back, the never-ending tension between the two groups. It wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. But Ayana wasn't here to talk about politics or war. She was here because she needed help. "I won't ask you to stay if you don't want to," Thomas said softly, "but I'll help you. I can't leave you out there." She looked at him again, her eyes softer now, though still wary. "I don't belong here," she whispered. "You don't know what I've done." Thomas shook his head. "It doesn't matter what you've done. You're here now, and I'm not going to let anything happen to you." For the first time, Ayana seemed to relax slightly. The tension in her shoulders eased, and her gaze softened. "Thank you," she murmured, barely audible. Thomas smiled, relieved to see her trust him, even if just a little. "You're welcome." As the night drew on, Thomas kept watch over her, not quite sure what to expect next. But he knew one thing for certain. His life, quiet and solitary, had just been forever changed by the arrival of a wounded Apache woman. And he wasn't sure where it would lead, but he was ready to find out. Morning sunlight slowly filled the small ranch house, touching the wooden walls with a warm golden glow. Thomas woke early as always. Habit guided him out of bed before the birds even began singing. For a moment he forgot about the events of yesterday. Then he heard a soft movement from the living room, and everything came back. Ayana. He stepped quietly into the kitchen and started preparing coffee and simple breakfast. He moved gently, trying not to make too much noise. When he looked toward the couch, he saw her sitting upright. She was awake, watching him carefully. Her dark eyes were alert, but the sharp distrust from yesterday had softened slightly. "You should rest more," Thomas said gently. "I have rested enough," she replied. Her voice sounded stronger now, though still tired. Thomas nodded, but didn't argue. He placed a plate of bread and eggs near her and stepped back, giving her space. He understood she needed distance to feel safe. Outside, the ranch looked peaceful, but inside Thomas felt a quiet tension. He didn't know much about her past, and he sensed there were many things she wasn't saying. Still, he decided not to push. Trust, he believed, grew slowly. After eating, Ayana tried to stand fully on her own. She moved carefully, testing her strength. Thomas watched but stayed silent unless she needed help. When she stumbled slightly, he moved forward, but she steadied herself before he reached her. "I can walk," she said softly. "I believe you," Thomas replied. Later that morning, she followed him outside. The wide land stretched endlessly around them. Horses grazed calmly and cattle moved slowly across the fields. Ayana looked around with curiosity, her expression thoughtful. "This land is quiet," she said. Thomas smiled faintly. "It's the only way I know." She watched him work for a while, noticing how patient he was with the animals. He spoke gently to the horses, moved carefully, and never rushed. There was strength in his quiet nature. Ayana seemed surprised by it. As the day passed, she began helping in small ways despite her injuries. She gathered tools, carried light items, and watched how Thomas repaired fences. Their communication was simple. Short sentences, small gestures, but slowly a comfortable silence grew between them. In the afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the land. Thomas felt uneasy, though he couldn't explain why. "Storm coming," Ayana said quietly. "Yeah," Thomas replied. "Looks like it." They worked together to secure loose equipment before the weather changed. While tying down a tarp, Thomas noticed Ayana staring toward the distant hills. Her body had grown tense again. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "I feel watched." Thomas followed her gaze, but saw nothing except empty land. Still, he trusted her instincts. She was a warrior. She noticed things he might miss. "We'll stay alert," he said calmly. As evening arrived, the storm passed without much trouble, leaving the air cool and fresh. They returned inside, sharing a quiet meal. Ayana seemed more relaxed now, though shadows still lingered behind her eyes. After dinner, she finally spoke more openly. "My people were attacked at night," she said slowly. "Not by settlers, by raiders. They wanted power. Many died." Thomas listened carefully, saying nothing. He could see the pain behind her words. "I escaped," she continued, "but others did not." Silence filled the room. The fire crackled softly, adding warmth to the cold air. "I'm sorry," Thomas said gently. She nodded, but didn't cry. Instead, she looked strong, controlled, like someone who had learned to carry pain quietly. "You helped me when you didn't have to," she added. "Why?" Thomas thought for a moment before answering. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "That's enough reason." Her expression softened slightly at his words. Later that night, they sat outside under the stars. The sky stretched endlessly above them, bright with light. Ayana seemed calmer here, surrounded by open space. "You live alone?" she asked. "Yes. Always?" "Mostly," he said with a small smile. "People come and go, but the land stays." She understood that. Her people also believed in connection to land. A long silence followed, but this time it felt peaceful rather than awkward. Suddenly Ayana's head lifted slightly. She listened carefully, eyes narrowing. Thomas listened. At first he heard only wind. Then faintly, far away, the sound of hooves. His chest tightened. "Riders," Ayana whispered. They both stood quickly. Thomas moved toward the barn to check his rifle, while Ayana stepped into the shadows, her warrior instincts returning instantly. The sound faded after a few minutes. Whoever had been out there had not come closer. Still, tension remained. They could be passing travelers, Thomas said, though he wasn't completely sure. Ayana shook her head slightly. No. They moved slowly, watching. Thomas felt a chill. Her instincts had been right earlier, too. Inside the house, he secured the doors and windows. For the first time since her arrival, fear settled quietly between them. "Maybe they are searching for me," Ayana said. Thomas met her eyes firmly. "Then they'll have to go through me." The shy rancher she met yesterday was changing. There was strength behind his calm nature. "You risk much," she said. Thomas shrugged lightly. "Maybe, but I won't send you away." For a moment, something warm passed between them. Not romance yet, but deep respect. That night, neither of them slept deeply. Every small sound felt louder. Every shadow seemed alive. But as the moon moved across the sky and dawn slowly approached, one thing became clear. Their lives were becoming connected in ways neither of them had expected. And somewhere beyond the hills, unseen eyes were still watching. The days following the strange riders passing by were tense. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't just been random travelers. His instincts, honed over years of living alone, told him that something more was at play. He found himself watching the horizon more often, listening to every sound that broke the silence of the land. Ayana, too, seemed different. Her usual quiet reserve had turned into alertness, like a coiled spring always ready to act. It was as if she, too, felt that danger was close. The warrior within her was awakening, and Thomas couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for her strength, even though he didn't fully understand the battles she had fought. The ranch, once a peaceful place, had become a place of uncertainty. They both knew something was coming, though neither of them spoke about it openly. One morning, as the sun was still low on the horizon, Thomas was out by the barn feeding the horses when he heard the familiar sound of hooves again. This time, it was louder and closer. His heart skipped a beat. Ayana, already alert, was by his side in an instant, her sharp eyes scanning the distance. "Get inside," she said, her voice low but commanding. "Not without you," Thomas replied, his own voice steady despite the growing tension. Ayana gave him a hard look but didn't argue. Together they moved quickly back toward the house, where Thomas grabbed his rifle, making sure it was ready. Ayana, though injured, was already checking the windows, positioning herself so she had a clear view of the approaching riders. As the sound of hooves grew louder, Thomas's chest tightened. There were at least 3 riders. They were moving fast, and they weren't just passing through. They were heading straight for the ranch. "They're coming for you," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ayana didn't answer at first. She just stood still, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the riders. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold and calm. "It's them, the raiders." Thomas didn't need any further explanation. He knew what she meant. The raiders who had attacked her people, the ones she had been running from, had found her, and now they were coming for the ranch. Ayana moved quickly to the back of the house, where she could get a better vantage point. Thomas followed her, staying close but letting her take the lead. They couldn't waste any time. The riders would be here soon. The two of them worked in silence, preparing for what was to come. Ayana checked her own weapons, a bow and a set of knives, her eyes focused and sharp. Thomas, though he wasn't a fighter by nature, was determined to protect what was his land, his home, and the woman who had come into his life unexpectedly. "They'll attack as soon as they get close," Ayana said, her voice steady. "They want me. But if they think they can take this land, they'll find they're wrong." Thomas nodded. His grip tightened on his rifle, his hands steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even a fighter. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let anyone take Ayana or his home. The riders were getting closer. Thomas could see them now, riding hard toward the ranch, their faces hidden under wide-brimmed hats. They were coming fast, and they weren't slowing down. This wasn't a friendly visit. "Get ready," Ayanna warned, her eyes locking on the approaching riders. Thomas raised his rifle, trying to keep his hands steady. He had no experience with such things, but he wasn't about to let fear control him. He focused on the riders, trying to judge how far away they were. His heart beat loudly in his chest, but he kept his breathing steady. Ayanna moved. She was fast, almost a blur as she launched herself from the shadows, her bow drawn and ready. She released an arrow in a single smooth motion. It struck one of the riders in the shoulder, sending him tumbling off his horse. The other two raiders jerked their horses to a stop, surprised by the sudden attack. "Stay back!" Ayanna shouted, her voice commanding. Thomas fired his rifle, the shot echoing across the land. It missed, but it was enough to make the raiders hesitate. They hadn't expected a fight. They hadn't expected someone like Ayanna. "Don't kill them if you don't have to," Thomas said, his voice tight.
Ayanna didn't answer. She didn't need to.
She had already moved into position, ready for whatever came next. The remaining two raiders dismounted quickly, drawing their guns, but Ayanna was faster. She was on them in seconds, using her agility and skill to disarm one of them before knocking him to the ground with a swift kick. The second raider hesitated, uncertain whether to fight or flee. Thomas, now feeling the weight of the situation more than ever, called out again. "Leave now! You're outnumbered." The raider looked at him, eyes full of anger and disbelief, but he seemed to realize that they couldn't win this fight. He turned to his fallen comrade and grabbed him by the arm. "Let's go!" he shouted. The two raiders mounted their horses quickly, and without another word they rode off into the distance, disappearing into the dusty horizon. Thomas let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He lowered his rifle, his hands shaking slightly. Ayanna stood still, her bow still drawn, her eyes scanning the horizon, ready for any sign of movement. After a moment she relaxed, lowering her weapon. "They're gone," she said, her voice cool and composed. Thomas nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. His heart was racing, but his body felt strangely calm. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep sense of relief. They had made it. "Thank you," he said quietly, looking at Ayanna. "You saved us." She just looked at him for a moment, her eyes softening. "I didn't do it alone," she said finally. Thomas smiled faintly. "Still, I'm glad you're here." Ayanna nodded, but her eyes turned distant again, as if she was thinking about something far away. "You're not safe here, Ayanna," Thomas said softly, his voice full of concern. "They'll come back. We need to figure out what to do." "I'll go," Ayanna replied without hesitation. "I'll leave. I'll go back to my people." Thomas felt his chest tighten at the thought of her leaving, of losing the bond they had started to build, but he knew she was right. The danger was real. He couldn't ask her to stay if it meant putting her in more danger. "I'll go with you," he said quietly. "I won't leave you to face this alone." Ayanna looked at him, surprised by his offer. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "You don't have to. But maybe we should talk more about it." And with that, the tension between them seemed to ease slightly. There was a new understanding, unspoken but strong. They both knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they wouldn't face it alone. The days after the raider attack were filled with uneasy calm. Thomas and Ayanna both knew it wasn't over. The men who had ridden up to the ranch were only a small part of the larger group hunting for Ayanna. They weren't safe yet. But for the moment, the ranch was quiet, and that gave them time to think and prepare. Ayanna spent most of her time out of sight, moving silently across the land, checking for any signs of danger. She didn't speak much about what had happened to her people. She wasn't ready to share all the details. But Thomas could see the pain in her eyes whenever she thought about her tribe. He could see the burden she carried, one she didn't want to talk about but could never escape. Thomas, meanwhile, kept working on the ranch. He couldn't sit idle. He couldn't just wait for the next threat to appear. He needed to feel like he was doing something, anything, to protect the land that had been his for so long. But he also couldn't ignore the feeling that something was changing between him and Ayanna. He felt a bond growing between them, something stronger than just the shared danger they faced. One morning, as Thomas worked in the barn, Ayanna approached him, her footsteps soft on the dusty ground. He looked up, surprised to see her so close, but there was something different about her. She didn't look as tense as usual. Her shoulders were relaxed, her expression more open. "I need to talk to you," Ayanna said quietly. Thomas put down his tools, wiping his hands on his pants as he turned to face her. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking."
About what you said.
"About going with me." Thomas was quiet for a moment, unsure of what she meant. "You don't have to go alone," he said again, more gently this time. "I want to help you. We can face whatever's ahead, together." Ayanna looked at him for a long time, her eyes soft but searching. "I don't know what to do, Thomas," she said finally. "I've been running for so long, and I don't know where I belong anymore." Her voice cracked slightly, and for a brief moment Thomas could see the vulnerability beneath the warrior exterior. She was a strong woman, but even the strongest people needed help sometimes. "I don't know either," Thomas admitted, stepping closer to her, "but I know that I don't want you to face this alone. Whatever happens, we'll deal with it together." Ayanna took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly. "I never thought I'd feel like this again," she said softly, almost to herself. "After everything, I thought I would never let anyone close. I thought I would only fight and survive. But now, with you, I feel like maybe there's something else." Something more. Her words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, Thomas realized just how much he cared for her. He had tried to keep his feelings buried, afraid to admit that the bond between them had grown into something deeper. But now, in the quiet of the morning, with the land stretching around them and the sky above, he couldn't deny it. "I feel it too," Thomas said softly. "You've become more than just someone I'm protecting. You've become someone I care about, Ayanna. And that changes everything for me." Ayanna looked at him, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. There were no raiders, no threats, just the two of them standing in the quiet of the world they had created together. The connection between them was undeniable, and in that moment both of them understood what it meant. Without another word, Ayanna stepped forward, closing the distance between them. She reached out, her hand brushing gently against Thomas's arm. The touch was soft but meaningful, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. Thomas looked down at her, his heart racing, and then, without thinking, he took a step closer, wrapping his arms around her. Ayanna leaned into him, resting her head on his chest. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe, not just physically, but emotionally. In the quiet comfort of his embrace, she allowed herself to let go of the fears that had haunted her for so long. She was no longer just running. She was standing, facing the future, with someone who cared. "I never thought I would find peace," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. "Not after everything I've been through." "You found it here," Thomas replied softly. "With me." Ayanna pulled back slightly, looking up at him with a small smile. "Maybe I have." The moment felt like the beginning of something new, something neither of them had expected. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they would face it together. Whatever came next, they would stand side by side. Over the next few days, they made their plans. Ayanna knew that staying on the ranch wasn't an option. The raiders would return, and they needed to move before they were trapped. But she didn't want to leave. She had grown to love this place, the quiet, the land, and especially Thomas. But she knew the road ahead would require them to be strong, to face the dangers that lay beyond the ranch, and she wasn't sure if Thomas was ready for that. Thomas, too, had his doubts. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a man of war, but he was a man who cared deeply for Ayanna. He would follow her wherever she went. He would fight for her, protect her, and keep her safe. It was the least he could do for the woman who had saved his life. The night before they left, Thomas sat outside, watching the stars above. Ayanna joined him, sitting beside him in silence. The air was cool, and the sounds of the night seemed to wrap around them, comforting in their stillness. "Do you think we'll ever find peace?" Thomas asked quietly. Ayanna looked up at the stars, her gaze thoughtful. "Maybe. But it's not something you find. It's something you create. And right now, we're creating it." Thomas smiled faintly, his heart lightened by her words. For the first time, he felt a sense of hope that he hadn't known before. Together, they could face whatever came next. Together, they could build something stronger than the world that had tried to tear them apart. And so, with the dawn breaking on the horizon, they prepared to leave. The road ahead would be difficult, but they knew they weren't walking it alone. Whatever came next, they would face it together, side by side,